Monsieur le Président
Mr. President of the European Parliament, President of the European Commission, members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me today to add my name to the list of heads of state and government of the European Union who have addressed the plenary session of the European Parliament in order to debate together the future of Europe. Addressing you here in Strasbourg is particularly important to me, given the special role this city has in European integration. I am lucky enough to belong to the generation which did not experience the Second World War nor the post-war period. The European Union has given our countries the longest period of peace our continent has ever known. Living in peace, that seems like a simple platitude, but believe me, peace is never a simple platitude. Europe is an old continent made up of countries and regions which have a wealth of culture and history. And it's a very diversity of its heritage which makes Europe such a great place. Any European political architecture must take account of that diversity. The fact that the European Parliament meets in plenary in Strasbourg, one of the 3 European capitals, along with Luxembourg and Brussels, is also symbolic in this respect. It was in actual fact at the European Council in Strasbourg in December 1989, just a few weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that the leaders of the time, great personalities such as Helmut Kohl, François Mitterrand, and even Hans-Dietrich Genscher, took a hold on the destiny of Cold War Europe by laying the foundations for European reunification, going hand in hand with German unification. And I'm referring back to this period at the end of the 80s of last century, because this was a time when the world was going through major changes. At the Strasbourg Council, an appeal was launched to start moving towards European Union. And that call, I think, is relevant still today, particularly because the world once again is facing major change. I'm thinking in particular of the unpredictable nature of some of our partners, but also the risk of a loss of European competitiveness in a globalized world. Our continent, more than ever, needs to be united if it is to be in a position to protect its citizens and shape its future. The conclusions of December 1989, I think, are still valid, if I can just quote one extract. It is in the interest of all the European states for the community to be strengthened and to speed up its progress towards a European Union. So, 30 years on, let's speed up our pace towards the European Union. Let's speed it up particularly because in those areas where our citizens are calling for it. Let's make our union stronger and able to face up to current challenges. In this context, citizen dialogue has to be cultivated. Citizen consultation proposed by President Macron, I think, are an important means for involving our citizens and identifying their concerns, their hopes, but also their expectations. Luxembourg is one of the first countries to have signed up to this initiative, and I have myself started the first consultations in Luxembourg, going back to the 20th of April. I advocate action by all member states in order to meet the expectations of our citizens, but we can only find that unity when action is required. But in the treaties, we have tools which allow us to move together with just a handful of states and the possibility of acting within the framework, in other words, of enhanced cooperation. Now, the fall of the Berlin Wall was the kickoff for welcome into our Europe, European nations from which we've been artificially separated since the end of the Second World War. The crisis, the refugee crisis, going back to 2015, and the UK referendum just a few months later, I think, are events which require fresh impetus. And I'm convinced that successive events over the last few years, Arab Spring, the war in Libya, refugee crisis, growing insecurity in the Sahel region, and particularly the war in Syria, not forgetting terrorism in our cities, mark a turning, I think, which calls for us to further strengthen EU action. We have to arm ourselves with the same courage as our predecessors and take take the necessary decisions in the face of these crises if we are to maintain a Europe which politically and economically is strong, free and open to the world. At the end of the last World War, caused by excessive nationalism, my country, along with its neighbours, seized the opportunity to become one of the founding countries of the European Union. And that historic chance allowed us to have a perspective on Europe, which is that of a state which has been involved in the evolution of the European Union over the time. Our choice for Europe was always dictated by our convictions, a choice of a European state which defines its national sovereignty through or thanks to its membership of the Union. And I'm very happy that recent opinions showed that people in Luxembourg are those who are most attached to Europe. Paradoxically now, however, populist forces are calling on sole national sovereignty to ensure the well-being of Europe. But it's the European Union which protects more than ever our sovereignty in a globalized world.
European Parliament, the European Union provides added value to European citizens, in countless instances improving their daily lives. However, one of the greatest challenges the Union faces today is the fact that these advantages resulting from a country's membership in the Union are simply taken for granted. This is therefore not a coincidence, in my view, that so many UK citizens living in my country have been applying for Luxembourg citizenship since the Brexit referendum. Many others have apparently doing the same in other member states. These applications for citizenship by British citizens are proof of the huge added value of the public goods and services created by the European Union, which these citizens do not want to abandon, most obviously, the four freedoms. Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident.
Mr. President, our citizens are demanding a Europe which is open to the world and tolerant, in which every man, every woman has the same opportunities, irrespective of religion, colour of skin or sexual preference. Only in this way can the European Union contribute to solutions to the global problems of our times, problems which the European national states on their own can no longer shoulder. I'm thinking, amongst other things here, about climate change. The negotiations in the Paris Climate Conference showed that the European Union can be a driving force in seeking solutions to global problems. Also, on global issues such as the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the EU can play a leading role, as we've seen over recent weeks. The changing demography worldwide is also requiring global and European answers. Questions of the 21st century migration are no longer national questions. I'm convinced that the European Union can represent one, if not the answer to these global challenges. Only a European response can ensure the security and general well-being of our citizens in the 21st century. I would like to expressly welcome here the work of the European Commission, particularly Commissioner Malmström, towards free and open global trade in compliance with the rules of the World Trade Organization. Our citizens want a part in economic growth and prosperity. The world's economic situation is positive right now, and growth is present in all EU member states. And so the time is ripe to strengthen the competitiveness of Europe. The European single market in this context is a prerequisite for our businesses to be and to remain globally competitive. The euro continues to be crucial to a correctly functioning EU single market, and that's why it is also of strategic importance that we further deepen European Economic and Monetary Union. Last Friday, the EU finance ministers, the proactive incentive of Luxembourg, achieved agreement on strengthening the banking union and so opened the way towards the deepening of the Economic and Monetary Union, to which the heads of state and government have committed. The euro and the single market mutually define each other, and in the same way, the economy and the monetary union are two sides of the same coin. Strengthening and deepening the EU single market is therefore one of our priorities. And I'm thinking in particular of the creation of an EU digital single market. It would be illogical if, on the one hand, we are calling for a European tax on internet companies, if, on the other hand, we don't even have a single EU digital market. And we should also, at the same time, avoid short-time interim solutions, which would make it even more difficult to take lasting decisions. To avoid any misunderstanding, I am in favour of the fair taxation of the profits of internet companies. This type of taxation should be in compliance with the need to retain and strengthen the global competitiveness of the EU. And therefore, I believe that cooperation with the OECD is crucial. What struck me about the discussions on taxation of digital companies, the so-called GAFAs, is the fact that a large number of these companies actually find their technological origins in countries outside of the EU. We often talk about tax harmonization in the European Union. The single market certainly requires a degree of harmonization also on the tax front. But what bothers me is the impression that this word tax harmonization, for many years, for many of our partners, has been taken to mean tax increases. Now, if we want to harmonize, shouldn't we be working in the interests of the global competitiveness and the interests of the European taxpayer? Shouldn't we be also talking about tax decreases? Believe me, I'm not talking about tax dumping here, but the global competitiveness of the European Union is something which is of crucial importance to me. Current discussions about taxation of internet companies also shows, however, that we need to invest more in innovation and in the financing of startups. From an economic part of view, the deficits of one party are the surplus of others in an open European single market. I'm not in favour of communitization of debts and non-performing loans, but to an extent I am fully aware of our responsibility for the general prosperity at European level. Excessive imbalances do not promote stability in Europe, but Mr. President, Europe is not only its single market. To paraphrase Jacques Delors, you don't fall in love with the common market. At the same time, we need also to strive for a European social model, which will encourage upwards social convergence between member states. I therefore welcome the vote in plenary yesterday following the agreement last March between Parliament and Council on the revision of the directive on the posting of workers in the internal market. I think this is an important step in our fight against social dumping. I also hope that an agreement on social legislation for the road transport sector can also be established before the end of this Parliament, which will allow for upward social convergence whilst taking account of the specific nature of this sector. I also welcome the proposal by the President of the Commission to create a European Labour Authority to strengthen cross-border cooperation and fighting fraud and abuse. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, only a strong European economy and a monetary union can create jobs and taxes to finance modern European models of social protection. Deepening the economic and monetary union shouldn't be limited only to the purely budgetary aspects. Boosting competitiveness and productivity at European level, as well as the introduction of a genuine European innovation space, are convergence factors which I'm convinced that in the long term will facilitate joint management in the budgetary sector. A competitive, prosperous Europe open to the world will be the best guarantee to protect the European social model. And finally, any deepening of the economic and monetary union will, sooner or later, also bring with it an extension of the Eurozone. With the exception of 2 member states, the EU treaties foresee accession of all member states to the euro. The adoption of the common currency is therefore an unavoidable legal principle in the implementation of the treaties. However, we should not rush, and we should learn our lessons from the experiences of recent years and ensure the productivity and competitiveness of all the member countries of the Eurozone. The next MFF should therefore also reflect the need for economic convergence by focusing, amongst others, more on innovation. I also welcome the proposals from the Commission, which constitute a good basis for our discussions. I'm also happy to see the attention being given to the Erasmus programme. I'm a member of the Erasmus generation. I was as a student from Luxembourg. I went to Nancy, and I also went to Thessaloniki, where I opened my eyes, apart from learning things I didn't know before. And that's what Erasmus provides Europe with on a daily basis. And I would encourage everyone within their studies to take part in this exchange, because it's more than just studies. It's an exchange of experience which is really, really worth it. Without going into the details, I also I believe in the added value of cohesion funds. That said, I think the time is ripe to think about this in terms of solidarity, about how best these funds can be used. It's important that the cohesion funds should be used in an even more transparent manner in respect of the principles underpinning the rule of law. Mr. President, before I address the expectations of our citizens in respect of the Union's external action, allow me to mention something about the internal organisation of the Union. It's quite right to discuss the internal organisation of the Union, a federal Europe or a Europe of nations, and the share of powers between the institutions. Now, I will not hide from you that I am somewhat hesitant about institutional debate. These discussions, important as they may be, are not something which generate enthusiasm amongst our citizens. And institutional change has to be linked to the pursuance of specific political objectives which meet the needs of our citizens and their aspirations. This is the specific value added which must underpin any institutional change. But let me say, this is something I discussed with some of your representatives yesterday evening. I have certain questions about this question of Spitzenkandidaten without having transnational lists. I know what your position is, but I do hope that you will come back to this one time. We've taken this the wrong way round. We have Spitzenkandidates, but we don't have transnational lists, but the Spitzenkandidat should be at the head of the transnational list.
The citizens that you and I represent expect the Union to contribute to their safety and security from internal and external threats. Notwithstanding our internal challenges in numerous policy domains, it seems to me that the largest crises were imported from outside the European Union. The refugee crisis was triggered by a worsening security situation in the Middle East and the Sahel region, to which the wars in Libya and Syria have contributed. The dramatic events of summer and autumn 2015, when hundreds of thousands of refugees have been fleeing war on a scale not seen in Europe since 1945, are obvious evidence that no European nation state is able to cope with such tragedies on its own. In that respect, I deeply regret the opposition by some EU member states to carrying their share of the burden in a spirit of solidarity. In the age of globalization, European solidarity is even more important than it was before. By the way, in any relationship, solidarity is a concept that should not be qualified. We need to stand together in solidarity and not try to introduce concepts like flexible solidarity, which at the end of the day will result in a reciprocal lack of solidarity. Sehr geehrter
Mr. President, well, as Goethe's Faust states so clearly, I know of nothing better of a Sunday or holiday than to talk of war and warmongering. While afar in Turkey people fight each other, we stand at the window, drain our glass and watch the colourful ships glide down the river. And then in the evening we happily return home and count the blessings of peace and peaceful times. This passage from Faust illustrates the changes of the time. Turkey, Syria, Libya, the entire southern part of the Mediterranean, as well as Russia and the Ukraine, are in today's globalized world our direct neighbors. These countries are not behind or far away. They are our neighbors, and only a global single external policy, foreign policy of the European Union can have any influence here. National borders make no sense in this context, or in other words, a national Luxembourg border can only be protected on the EU external borders, as citizens are rightly expecting acts. Frontex is of crucial importance, not because I want to close the EU external borders, but because I believe that stronger European border protection can contribute and is crucial indeed to the security of the European Union, protection of our values. And I again welcome the Commission's financial proposals. I'm convinced that our citizens in Europe will be ready to help finance guaranteed security on our external borders. Security, in the same way as freedom to travel and freedom of movement, is an important European good. Freedom to travel a la Schengen and the protection of the external borders depend on each other. More Europe and greater EU budgets, which will relieve national budgets, I think are really needed. And I welcome the fact that every EU citizen, wherever they are in the world, can enjoy consular protection from all the present European consulates. Mr. President, the migration crisis of 2015 showed that the European Union really has to increase its efforts not only to render its external borders safe, but also, more generally speaking, to strengthen its policies on the external front, such as foreign affairs, defence and development cooperation, without forgetting a common policy on asylum and immigration. It will only be by pooling our national sovereignties that we will be able to ensure our own sovereignty. Let's show the same courage as our predecessors back in 1989, when they struck out together to reunite Europe. Let's together ensure our security and our borders. I'm convinced that together we will spend less if we pool our efforts, because we will have efficiency gains and synergy. The same principle applies for defence. Luxembourg is a country which is lucky enough to be surrounded by friendly countries which are no threat to our security. On the contrary, by its history, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg could never be suspected of pushing the Union in any other direction apart from that of supporting peace. We believe in the virtues of multilateralism and international law, diplomacy and development cooperation. Luxembourg, like other countries, has also faced budgetary difficulties over the last few years. And believe me, some people have said that the cooperation budget, well, it's something we could get rid of. Why should we want to help abroad when we still have problems at home? My government, as the preceding government, decided that even in the most difficult times, our development cooperation budget, that percentage that we use for the poorest people in the world, is well spent. Well, some people are asking what they're going to feed their children with for the week, whereas we are asking ourselves, is it going to be hot or cold? And some people are asking about prospects for the future as well. Now, young people maybe didn't have prospects yesterday or today, prospects of having a job and being or looking optimistically towards the future. We are helping in all of that, so we stand by our development cooperation. I regret that when the red pen is brought out in certain countries, that's cooperation for development is one of the first things to go. It's populist and it's not good. I'm convinced that it is in the interests of the citizens of the states of the Union that we manage to have closer cooperation in our external relations. And I would advocate a rapid implementation of the permanent structured cooperation, which was launched at the European Council on the 14th of December 2017. I also believe that we have to further our cooperation in our external policy. I think that the aim should be to make the European Union a stronger voice in favour of peace. It's a fundamental value because warfare negates human rights. Because of its history, Europe has to be a rampart against dictatorship and barbarism. Our European values, as we've established in the treaty, I think constitute fundamental consensus between our member states, and they're the very basis for our relations with the rest of the world. So we have to stand up and continue to stand up against the profound causes for insecurity. And we also have to continue on the development cooperation front. Now, I talked about common values, and I cannot conclude without talking about the importance I attach to freedom of the press, an essential component in our democracy. Over the last year, several dozens of journalists have been murdered, 2 of them within our own union, and that is something which is of huge concern to me. The European Union must continue to defend and to promote freedom of the press. Mr. President, I spoke to you in French, in German, in English, and I now would like to thank you all for the cooperation, and I've just said that in our national language in Luxembourg. I wanted to thank all of the MEPs from Luxembourg who defend the interests of the Grand Duchy here in Europe. We're not the biggest member state, but we do fully believe in Europe. So let's speed up our pace towards Europe. Our world is a changing world. The European Union constitutes the best guarantee for our collective sovereignty and the well-being of our citizens, all our citizens. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.